About what?
About the article on questioning. He did give us some information about assessment that we'll talk about.
That was funny because he's my block instructor. So I was like, wait, that's Dr. Bond.
That's right, it is. I'd be interested to see what he might edit on that.
No.
Because one of the things he's got in there is contrary to Mary Bud Rowe's wait time format, and we'll talk about it when we get to that.
I was going to say there's stuff that I was taught differently from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. We'll get to it. All right. So the 5 criteria for content selection. You saw the video on that. That is from the AAAS, the American Advancement for the Advancement of Science. That is a test question. What is the AAAS? Advancement for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. That is a test question. So that's kind of one of those fundamental science organizations. Paige has got her test question pages listed there.
Yeah. Is that what that is? No, this is the notes that we're supposed to take. I'm just circling. We need to make that Google Doc.
Did you find them?
Yes, I made them.
Made some copies of them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we'll pass those out.
These lollipops are big. They don't fit into your mouth very well.
What doesn't know about pops? Daniel?
Yes, I
I
know.
had to spit mine out because those hurt my jaw.
Maggie, let me see that, or, well, I'll look on the Crystal, hold yours up, that's okay, just hold it up, when you can read it, I can read it. All right, so what you will notice, if you will look at, no, okay, let me see here.
I'm going to say like
Read it up close.
you have good eyes.
All right, so if you look at, let me see. Well, if you look at the third page, chapter 5, what you will see is, if you look on the column on the left, you will see that it has, it's chapter 6. It says engage, explore on the same line. So in other words, that activity or whatever they're having them do is both. And then they have explore and explain, and then they got elaborate, evaluate together. So these people wrote the 5E. They are the authors of the 5E. And so what I'm trying to show you here is there's flexibility in it. You know, you don't you're driving the cart. The cart's not driving you. So if you look through there, you'll see some other ones that are also examples of that. Look at the next page, which would be the end of chapter 7, and you'll see that it has engage, explore, explain. What does it say? Explain. Explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. And then if you jump down, it has explain, elaborate, and evaluate. Or I'm sorry, engage, explore. And then if you jump over to the next chapters, you can see it's not just a 5E. And in fact, I'm going to give you a copy of an article that is talking about a 7E. Okay, so this is the model generally that works well, but you don't put a round peg into a square hole. Actually, that's not the correct way. It's a square peg into a round hole. Do y'all know that story? If you went to Williamsburg, you would know, perhaps they would give the same lecture. And they used to put shoes together, the soles of shoes, with pegs. And they would, of course, drive a hole in the leather, and the hole is going to be round, but the peg is going to be square. And so they would stick that in to hold the sole onto the shoe. And then they also sewed them on with thread. But guess what kept the shoes together longer? The pegs, not the thread that held the soles on. It's kind of interesting. So the real analogy is a square peg into a round hole, but that's really a good thing, and we've flipped it around to say, you know, that's odd, it doesn't work. But that's the rest of the story, if you will.
That's fine.
Okay.
Is this for Andre?
Yeah.
Okay, I've already got
So this is, you know, the AAAS has been doing this since the benchmarks for science literacy a long time. And they have identified what they call the 5 criteria for content selection. This is also an essay question for your test. So why is it that we should think about criteria for content selection? Why is it we should think there are some guidelines that we might want to follow about content? Well, if we looked at the previous TEKS, there's a lot of content in it. And so how do we know which content that we actually are going to add, because the TEKS are required, but what content are we going to add to that? Well, we have to consider the amount of instructional time. There seems to be less and less instructional time because you've got assemblies and pep rallies and distribution of iPads and, you know, all kinds of things that are going to disrupt your classes and going to decrease the amount of instructional time you have. And because it's limited, you can't waste it. So you have to carefully select the content that's going in there, and you have to remember that those TEKS have to be taught because they're ultimately going to be tested by the district and or the state, depending on, you know, what grade level that you use. So you have to be careful about what you're going to teach. Not the TEKS, but what, in addition to the TEKS that you're going to teach. And I think the hardest thing is what I'm not going to teach. Even in this course, I know a lot more than I teach y'all. And I'll give you an example. I used to have a safety unit in this course, but if I think about the just in time, when are you going to need to think about safety in your lessons? Not now, but when you get into your student teaching. So when you go into student teaching, there are 3 safety certificates that you're going to get that are online. One is from Flynn Scientific, one is from TEA, and then one is, I give you some, there's a lecture, an online lecture with the idea about what are the legal aspects of safety. So even I, as a teacher, have to figure out what I'm not going to teach. What is it that I need to say for student teaching? Because we have monthly seminars of about 6 hours each. And before they start meeting, I have about 3 days or 4 days of seminars that we meet. So there are things that I know that you have to have, and there are things in Danielson framework that the university requires that we include. All of us knows a lot. We know a lot of stuff. We can't teach or tell everything that we know. We shouldn't. And we can't expect our students to do that. That's why you don't want to add too much. So if you use those best practices, it's going to make you a lot easier for you to make those decisions about it. These are all National Science Education Standards. You know about this one. What do you know about Science for All American?
What's in it? Based on what high school seniors
Exactly. So it's the first one. It was published in 1989. Who's the author?
That's a question.
AAAS, yeah.
Oh.
No, it's not a trick question, no. That's why I said you need to know about the AAAS. It's very prominent in science and science education. So that came out. It was for high school graduating seniors. And then the benchmarks came out. And what's the difference between the SFA and the BSL?
Benchmarks was for all grade levels, wasn't it?
Is it K-12? But what?
It's broken up into 3 different.
Right, it's broken up into grade levels. What are the grade levels?
K to 3, 4 to 8,
K2,
3 to
3, 5,
3, 5,
and then 6,
6, 8,
8.
and then 9, 12.
That's an essay question right there. You need to know what levels they are. And then the National Science Education Standards came out, and there are a couple of differences in the NSES from the BSL. So what is one difference? Name one difference. We just talked about it.
The grades?
Yeah, the grade bands. So what are the grade bands for the NSES?
Is that one K through 4? Or, yeah, K through 4, and then 5 through 8, and then 9 through 12?
Yeah, so the BSL had 4 grade levels, the NSES had 3 grade levels. And I don't know why they chose it that way, but it still gives you a little bit of, different perspective. What's some other differences between the NSES and the BSL beside the grade bands?
How the NSES separates different, so they have physical science, life science, earth and space, while benchmark BSL is more general.
No,
What's different
they have the same kind of divisions of the sciences, but they have some extra information that the BSL doesn't have.
Misconception.
Pull them out. They're right there, and yeah, that one right there. Pull out those NSCS.
Which ones are they? Oh, I see.
Okay, now look at the table of contents. And see what's different with the table of contents of the NSCS versus the BSL. Okay, so what are some differences that you see?
Oh, they have one for all levels as well. So they have K through 12, and then they also have
About what?
about all science standards.
Oh, it's the standards are broken up.
You're just looking at content. They've got more than content in them.
We have content, science, education, program standards.
Okay, so they got program standards. What else is different?
Assessment.
Okay, assessments.
System standards.
Pardon?
Teaching standards.
Teaching
Teaching
standards.
standards, yeah.
Professional development.
Yeah. So I don't expect you to know those chapters, but what I expect you to know that you could, if you wanted some, to find out what our standards say, you would go to the NSES for everything, topics that are outside the content standards
So
and some pedagogy.
Yes.
So BSL is more content standard,
Well,
while
NSES has content standards.
But
BSL
it
is more
also
content
has
focused.
things focused towards the teacher. Or
Our administrator,
Yes.
our program, so it's more than just the content and the pedagogy. Yeah. Okay. So those were, as I said, the first ones. Let's see. The newest ones are the framework, which you also have on your desk, 2011, and the Next Generation Science Standards. And so you need to know the names of those, and you need to know the dates of them. So on your essay, you need to know names and dates of those. And it's not just something to memorize. It's not why I want you to know it. I want you to know the history of your professional standards. In these new ones, remember I told you that, in fact, one of the school board members, probably been 2 years ago now, I was talking to her about these are called the Next Gen NGSS standards here. And she said, well, they're Common Core. And I said, no, Barbara, they are not Common Core. Now, there is some linkage to Common Core that we'll see a little bit later. But what is Common Core? I thought it had it on the slide. What subjects does Common Core address?
Math
Math,
and
ELA.
insurance.
Math and ELA, that's all. So there is no science. We already have our science standards. Common Core did not need to create any because we had those. Now the math people, the NCTM, the National Teachers of Mathematics Association, or something like that, they also had standards, but the Common Core put them in a little bit different framework, And I don't really know enough about it to tell you the difference between the two. I suspect there's not a whole lot of difference. But the issue was the idea that states just did not have standards. They just had odds and ends. There was not a good organization with them, or what you might mostly call complete. But they are not Common Core. They do have links to Common Core that we'll look at a little bit later on.
Common Core is the like the. Explain to me what Common Core is again. It's where
National standards for
for
science
all-
and
okay.
I mean math and English, ELA.
okay for all states. So it's
If they
like
want to adopt them.
because we have TEAs.
Well, other states
Oh.
had too, but the problem was that if you look at our scores internationally, our kids are just not competing well with a lot of other countries. And there was some conversation, well, if you don't have good standards, they're not going to. That would be one major reason, and it's kind of foundational. And so the governors, the National Governors Association, not Obama, created, it's got a group, I'm sure the governors didn't do it, but they got a group to create the math and the ELA Common Core standards. Then the Obama administration gave money, it was called, I think, Reach to the Top, and they gave money to adopt the Common Core standards to improve their instruction in their states. I don't understand how some states adopted NGSS, and I don't know how they did that with what I know about NGSS, and when we get to that, we'll have some conversation. But the AAAS provided content standards for not only math and science, but also technology early on, huh? What?
I coughed.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. And then they also added in that first AAAS Science for All Americans, on these pages here, these criteria for content selection. They defined content as knowledge and skills, which is kind of what we commonly use now. And they said there are 5 scientific and educational criteria to identify the content worth knowing or teaching. That there is a common core of learning in science, math, and technology, and what we learn in science, technology, and math has an influence on what is worth knowing and what will be worth knowing in the future for our students. So we tried to identify for it. I don't know if you've ever thought how difficult that would be to write a set of curriculum standards just from a blank page. Yeah. So, these guidelines help us. They identified the content that was worth knowing. They did not list any topics that were of passing technical interest or limited scientific scope. So if there was some kind of fad going around, it didn't capture those things. And it was intent to build that kind of foundation that students would need to know for a lifetime. What do graduating seniors need to know idea. So the first one was utility. This, as I said, is an essay question on every test that you will have. And the first one that they listed was utility. They said that content is important and should be taught and learned if it is useful in making personal decisions, or it's useful in making long-term employment prospects to enhance that. What do you need to know to be able to be employed 20 years from now? What is really foundational?
Do we need to be able to define utility or just specifically the 5 criteria?
Yes. Describe, I won't say define. What does utility mean?
Okay.
What does utility mean in personal decisions? What does it mean for long-term employment? And remember that all of these standards are talking about knowledge or skills. In some case, both of them. And then the other part, what's the long-term graduate employee's need? Remember I told you, if you're thinking about what you're going to teach them in high school, what does that high school graduate need to know? I mean, we're teaching stuff, there's no reason for them to know cell respiration. Why do they have to know all the steps of mitosis and meiosis? Really? Why?
I mean, only the people going into those fields. Makes sense.
We're talking about the high school graduate.
Yeah.
What do they need to know? We have courses that they can learn more of those details with. And then the second thing, they said that we need to teach students social responsibility. Can they make science-related decisions? We have huge arguments right now about climate change. We have huge arguments with making social or political decisions, whether it's how you vote, whether it's how you contact your representatives, which you should. But, you know, to take a social responsibility there. The idea about this, the environment is becoming more and more to the forefront. Are any of y'all Catholic? No? Okay, well, I just noticed the Catholic Church has almost a month-long focus on the environment. I've forgotten what they titled it. It had to do with, you know, the environment is a creation of God and we have a responsibility to it. So you've got a lot of people, a lot of different groups that are saying it's important for us to know about the environment.
They may throw that in with the body of life section, talk about how we're the body, and then also the world is the body.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all I read was what the newspaper article said Sunday, which they just brought it out, so, yeah, there was a lot more to it because it's gonna be about 3 weeks long, isn't it? About
Wonderful.
3 weeks,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do that at all levels.
Yeah, and then there are voting decisions that you're gonna make, so the idea, what do you need to know about, making those kind of decisions? There's also what we call important knowledge. There are things that I have taught that are not important. Genus species names of crabs, Calanectes sapidus, blue crab. What in the world does a graduating senior need to know that for? But I taught it. I have some students from that era that can go back and tell me it's Calanectes sapidus. They do. It's funny. But it's not important knowledge, and I should not have wasted class time on that. But I didn't know then. You know, I didn't have the kind of guidelines then that we have now. So the idea that not all knowledge is important, so when you're thinking about creating your lesson, think about it. What is it that's really important for students that they need to know? Is it pervasive in our culture? Is it everywhere? It's not just an American thing, or it's not just a European thing, or, you know, wherever. And would someone be considered uneducated if they did not know it? So a high school graduate having a conversation with another intelligent high school graduate, what do they need to know that's important? Philosophical value. Can they think deeply about important stuff? Can they ponder enduring questions such as life and death? Are we making life and death decisions now?
I would argue in some ways, yeah.
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, we make it with decisions about whether or not we're going to do, a chemical treatment for cancer, or whether they're going to go with the what do they call it? Homeopathic decisions. Okay, so there are people that make decisions like that are pretty important. Their decisions, even if someone has possibly terminal cancer, they'll make a decision about whether they want to continue any kind of treatment and live 3 or 4 more months with pretty bad life, conditions, if you would, or live more comfortably but live a shorter period of time. So these kind of decisions are made every day. You may not make them in your life yet, but you will at some point. All of us will. Perception and reality. And you know what I think about with that is all of these deniers. I have heard some of the weirdest things. I'm not out there listening to kids, closely like teachers are. But I know that y'all come back out from the block and you tell me some weird things that you've heard, that the deniers. Can you name some?
I can't name anything right off the top
Paige?
of my head.
My dad thinks climate change is concocted by China to make his business less profitable.
There
Does
you
he
go.
work for an oil company?
He works for a saddle company.
So y'all don't have that conversation, I take it. What about you?
I mean, there's obviously climate change. I've heard stuff people
Yeah.
against that, but also evolution,
Oh, yeah.
the theory of it, and that it's
That's
not
because-
this way. It can't be this way because X religious text says so. But
No, it doesn't.
some people would argue the other way. Yeah, I know.
I know.
I agree.
But the issue that you're going to have questions, important questions like that, and you're gonna have kids in your class that are deniers, like the Holocaust. They say it didn't happen.
What?
I had one
Yes.
in Dr.
In
Westerland's
Germany?
class. Yeah.
Fucking really?
Not a Holocaust denier, a moon landing denier.
Yeah, and then nobody's ever landed on the moon.
It was Kubrick. It's Stanley Kubrick.
And I heard the weirdest one on an interview. I guess it was night before last on Huckabee, who's on the Christian station, the TV station, and he had an author on there, Ari Horowitz, I believe his name was, and so he was in Syria interviewing the Muslim Brotherhood members, here and there, how they do all the street kind of stuff. And the guy said that Osama bin Laden is not real. That the United States bombed their own two twin towers.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I love deniers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there are deniers everywhere. So the idea about teaching, important ways of thinking, whether you agree or disagree, there should be always that question of what is the evidence for your answer. If someone says something, okay, well they may have what you
Flat Earth, I think, is also.
Oh yeah,
big
flat
one.
Earth, that's a big one. That's an old one, flat Earth one. Yeah.
It's gotten out of control though in some like.
Well,
ways.
a lot of it has, and I think some of it has to do. We haven't done a good job with science education because we focus on memorizing vocabulary.
So when
How
you
does that
have,
teach you to think? What?
so when you have students in your class saying these things, what exactly, are you supposed to just start telling them, no, this is, do
Now,
you
is that
just
gonna convince them?
no, is this a
Oh,
time
why
when
would
you
we do
say,
that?
is this a time when you say, I don't know, let me think about it?
Well, I think that's probably a good thing to say because,
At the moment.
well, for a lot of reasons. One of which is that actually time, is your instructional time worthy of that kind of conversation?
I've been taught that it can be a good learning opportunity, in fact. So
Maybe.
you don't ever try to make them feel stupid for believing something else. You can. I've always been taught it's an interesting opinion or perspective. There are things that we can look at that may relate to your lesson, like with flat Earth, the whole sun rising, sunset, angle of the Earth, stuff like that can connect to your lesson somehow.
But that's telling them. What I think should be done is to ask them what is the evidence for that.
Why do you think that? What's
Yeah.
your
What-
evidence?
No, not just why. You have to use that word. What is the evidence for your answer?
And then bring up counter. If they bring up evidence, you can bring counterpoints to it as well.
Well, you might, and I would say that in general, until you, especially as a new teacher, I would not do that in
Oh,
class.
hell no, yeah.
You'd say, let's discuss that later on. And talk with them about it, don't not do it, because you told them, let's discuss it later. But, you cannot you're gonna have to be really careful as a new teacher, because there are people who will draw you into really bad situations, and kids will do the same thing too. So you have to assume the worst in some cases, I'm sorry to say. But we do want to teach kids to think about what we call philosophical value. What is in this perception of reality fits right in there. So is there some way that would fit in your lesson that you can bring in some of this idea? And so if you're talking about sunrise, sunset, or whatever,
Flat Earth, yeah.
that would fit in with a flat Earth. And what is the evidence for this? And if they are doing the kind of, you have a Westland's course?
Yeah.
You have Westland's course? So
Science
if you
1
use
and
some of those labs in there,
Mm-hmm.
then that would be evidence, whether they would believe it or not, it still would be evidence, and you have maybe planted a seed. You're not gonna convince them in a year in your class, it's not gonna happen. Because they're hearing it at home, there's whole families that have this kind of perception. The individual good versus collective welfare. That's a big discussion right now. You know, it's a big discussion with the refugees, it's a big discussion with, certain sections of our population, about, you know, do we look at the individual, or do we look at the whole group? And if you look at different cultures, one good thing about traveling, which you know since you've done that, I don't know how much traveling, Paige, how much traveling have you done?
Not a whole.
Other countries?
Whole lot, like Mexico and Canada and
Okay.
Bahamas.
Yeah, Canada's not too much different, Mexico's a little bit different, but, in fact, I was just reading an article about, trying to think how they got into it, but the Hispanic mothers, had to be taught how to advocate for their children with the schools or with the teacher, because that was not in their culture. Their culture is to value the teachers, and they're the boss and they know the best. And so it's not that they're arguing with them. It was not, you know, not presented in that way, but how to, you know, to ask questions and
To work with the teacher.
yeah, to work with a teacher, and even to find out what the student needs to be doing for homework, even, that, you know, they think that's what the schools do, and then we don't have to do anything here, but that's their culture, and it's not any kind of value on it, it just is. So the idea of this kind of conversation those are good conversations to have, a lot better than some of the trivial ones that we have. And then certainty and doubt, and I think that gets back to what is the evidence for your answer. And then sometimes you just do things because they're fun. We call that childhood enrichment, and one of the things that we know that children are not doing enough of, and that's just free play.
Yeah.
I sent that article to y'all about that, didn't I?
I watched a video recently about Finland and why their education system is so good, and they have the least amount of homework and the least amount of class time than any other schooling system.
And the teachers have a lot more prep time, and they go into teaching much better prepared than ours do. But there's a lot of other things, because they've got a homogeneous society and culture and rules, etc. You know, where America.
It's a different social.
Yeah, but you know, it's like leading you on that field trip. I did not try to identify every flower with you. I didn't ask you to identify every flower. I wanted you to enjoy it, even as fast as we were moving, so that you go back and enjoy it on your own. So that might be the thing that you think about when you're selecting that content. Now, every lesson doesn't have to have all 5, but when you're creating your lesson, this is one of the parts of that research to guide you have to complete. Which of these 5 criteria is that lesson going to meet? One or more of those 5. I think it's important to tell kids why they need to learn something. And oftentimes kids can come up with better answers than I can about why this would be important, or how they've used it some way that I hadn't thought of, or the parent has used it some way, you know, that I hadn't thought of. But I think it's important to try to figure out why it's important, because a lot of kids are always asking that, well, why do I need to know this? It makes no sense, because it's memorize this stuff, but their life is over here.
Yeah.
You know, there's just no connection to it.
And the teachers get mad at them too, like they're insulting them. Like, why should you know this? Well,
Because I said so.
Exactly, yeah.
Or it's in the teaks. That's even worse answer, I
Because the
think.
state tells me to.
Yeah. So
Well, sometimes that is.
yeah, so you know, trying to figure out why it's important, and that's also in your research guide, and then to you know, to have them identify where the need to know is. Why do I need to know this? Maybe that might be a quiz question, or an exit ticket, or something like that, and it might give you some ideas that you hadn't thought about.
Or even small group discussion. I did that with learning the body systems. Had some kids fighting back. All right, let's break out in your table groups. What could be useful from this knowledge? Well, and then I figured out a couple of my kids' moms were pregnant, so you know, that's where these different hormone systems. Hey, you know, I'm going through puberty. That could help me understand a little bit more. So.
Yeah. Okay, 5 criteria for content selection. You're gonna have to list them, and you're gonna have to describe them on your tests. Okay, let's take a lap. Will you turn that off, please?
Let's see, where's that right